What if what you see isn't what's truly there? Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, where today, in Season 07, Episode 05, we dive into Chapter 5, Perception, from Atkinson and Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology, 15th edition, to unravel the mysteries of how our minds construct the world around us. So when we talk about perception, what are we really trying to understand? Is it just our senses passively taking in information?
Oh, it's far more active than that. You see, perception isn't merely our eyes passively receiving light or, our ears picking up sound waves. It's an incredibly active, creative process happening inside your brain that literally builds the world you experience.
That's a powerful distinction right from the start. And to highlight just how, dramatic this construction can be, let's maybe open with that truly chilling anecdote from the chapter.
Yeah, the story of Alex and Simon the hunters. It really sets the stage.
Right. So a few years ago, these two hunters, Alex and Simon, were out late, dark, quiet forest.
And they'd been talking about bears all day, priming themselves, in a way.
Exactly. Then they hear this low growling sound, and they perceive a large, dimly illuminated animal about 50 meters away.
Terrified, thinking it's a bear. They fired.
The growling stopped, and then an unmistakably human scream. Just awful.
It wasn't a bear, it was a tent with two campers inside. One was tragically killed.
And the prosecutor just couldn't fathom it, right?
Right.
Asking the jury, how could they possibly mistake this rectangular yellow tent for a furry brown bear?
But, and this is the key point from the chapter, research suggests that under those specific circumstances, tiredness, darkness, that strong expectation of bears, perceiving the tent as a bear was actually, quote, not at all unreasonable.
Wow. So perception isn't just about the raw data hitting our senses.
Not at all. It's a tragic example of how our internal models shape what we perceive. Our brain is constantly working to solve what it sees as an unending series of problems presented by our environment. To do this, it constructs a continually updated model of the environment within our minds.
A model, like a simulation.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. And this is crucial because of something called the many-to-one problem. Think about vision. A single image on your retina, say, of a pine tree could result from an infinite number of actual size-distance combinations.
Okay, wait, like a small tree close up or a huge tree far away could look the same on my retina.
Exactly. A 2-meter tree at 100 meters or a 4-meter tree at 200 meters would produce the exact same retinal image. So your brain has to make assumptions. It uses stored information, like knowing Christmas trees are generally around 2 meters, or maybe noticing a person standing next to it, to resolve this ambiguity and create a coherent perception.
So it's less about simply seeing and more about actively inferring, building a coherent world. Okay, so our mission in this deep dive, then, is to explore how those raw sensations, like light hitting the retina, get translated into the complex perceptions that guide our actions.
Even when those perceptions lead to surprising or, as we just heard, even tragic outcomes.
Right. And you can see this disconnect between the raw data and what we perceive almost immediately. Like, think about figure 5.1 in the book, that ambiguous image of black and white blobs.
Oh, yeah, the Dalmatian picture. At first, it's just noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meaningless. But then once you see the full picture or someone points out the dog, you suddenly see it and you can't unsee it. Your perception has changed, even though the input hasn't.
Or that classic phrase, I love Paris in the springtime.
Huh. Yes. Did you notice the double, the "the"? Most people don't. Our brains just smooth it over, making these quick, often unconscious interpretations, sometimes skipping right over the actual raw data.
And this active problem-solving approach brings us to the 5 major functions of perception that we're going to explore today. First, attention.
Deciding what to even process.
Exactly. Second, localization.
Figuring out where things are.
Third, recognition.
Knowing what things are. Tent or bear.
Right. Fourth, extraction.
Boiling it down to the essentials.
And finally, constancy.
Keeping things stable even when the input changes.
Got it. That's quite a roadmap.
It covers a lot of ground, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this first one.
Yeah.
Attention. Our senses are constantly bombarded with information. I mean, right now, I feel my chair, I hear the hum of equipment. How does our brain even begin to sort through all that sensory input?
It's truly overwhelming, isn't it? And attention basically acts as the brain's screening process.
Yeah.
It's crucial to understand that for every single thing your senses pick up, the vast majority is simply, filtered out before it even reaches your conscious awareness.
Filtered out entirely.
Mostly, yeah. It's about selecting the relevant information and discarding the irrelevant. Think of reading a book. Your shoes might feel tight, you might hear sounds outside, smell something cooking, but you're focused on the text, right?
Right. Tuned everything else out.
Exactly. And psychologists believe this involves 3 interacting brain systems. There's one for general alertness, kind of like an air traffic controller needing to stay aware.
Then there's a second system for orienting your processing resources to whatever is task relevant, like focusing on my voice right now to understand what I'm saying.
Makes sense.
And a third, often called the executive system, which basically decides whether to keep attending to something or switch focus to other information. It's the decision maker.
So a crucial part of this is selective attention. When we say look at a scene, our eyes aren't just still, are they?
Not at all. They make these incredibly quick jumps called saccades, like 20 milliseconds, super fast. And then they pause for maybe 300 milliseconds in what are called eye fixations.
It's during those pauses, the fixations, that we actually gather the visual information.
That's right. And what's fascinating is where our eyes choose to fixate. It's not random. They instinctively hone in on the most informative or unusual parts of a scene.
Informative, like what?
Well, when you look at a face, you spend most of your fixation time on the eyes, nose, and mouth. Why? Because those features are the most efficient way to distinguish one face from another.
Okay, that makes sense.
And similarly, if you saw a picture of a farmyard with, say, an octopus and
Jackals and octopus.
yeah, your eyes would snap to that octopus much faster and more frequently than they would to a perfectly normal tractor. It's unexpected, it's informative.
So we're drawn to the unusual or the important bits, which leads into that weapon focus phenomenon, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a really clear, sometimes tragic example. Victims of armed crimes often have incredibly vivid recall of the weapon, the gun, the knife, but very little memory for other aspects of the scene, like what the perpetrator looked like or what they were wearing.
Wow.
And lab studies confirm this. People fixate much more and longer on threatening objects like a knife compared to something benign like a checkbook in the same context.
So in real life, that weapon becomes critical survival information.
Precisely. It grabs your attention because, evolutionarily speaking, it's the most important thing in that environment at that moment.
But attention isn't just about where our eyes are pointing, is it? We can sort of mentally focus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can direct your visual attention without physically moving your gaze at all. There are experiments, cueing experiments, where you're told to expect something in a specific spot.
Okay.
Even if your eyes haven't moved there yet, you'll detect an object faster if it appears in that cued location. You're mentally shining a spotlight, so to speak.
A mental spotlight. I like that. And this works for hearing too, right? The classic cocktail party effect.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example. You're in a crowded, noisy room, tons of conversations happening, yet somehow you can tune most of it out and selectively attend to just one specific person's voice.
How do we do that?
We use a bunch of cues. The direction the sound is coming from, obviously. Watching the speaker's lip movements helps a lot. And we latch onto particular voice characteristics, the pitch, the intonation, the rhythm. And what's really remarkable is that even without those physical cues, if you really concentrate, you can sometimes follow a message based purely on its meaning, its continuity, although it's much, much harder amidst all that noise.
That leads to a really profound point about memory, doesn't it? The link between attention, perception, and what we actually remember.
It's incredibly tight.
Yeah.
We consciously remember very little about information we haven't attended to.
Like in those shadowing experiments.
Exactly. You wear headphones, different message in each ear. Your job is to repeat or shadow just one of them out loud.
Okay, got it.
Afterwards, if you're asked about the unshadowed message, the one you ignored, you might recall some basic physical characteristics. Was it a high voice or low, male or female? But the content, almost nothing.
You wouldn't even notice if the language changed.
Typically, no. It could switch from English to French and back again, and you'd likely be oblivious.
Wow. So does that mean the ignored stuff is just completely blocked? Like it never gets processed?
Well, that was the initial thought. But now we know it's not completely filtered out. It's more like it's attenuated.
Attenuated, like turning the volume down.
Precisely. Like a volume control turned way down, but not completely off. The information is still processed at some level, just at a much lower priority.
And the evidence for that is?
The classic example is hearing your own name. You could be in that noisy cocktail party, totally focused on one conversation, not consciously processing the others. But if someone across the room softly speaks your name,
Your ears perk up.
exactly, that couldn't happen if the unattended message was completely lost early on. Your name is a highly relevant stimulus, so even attenuated, it can break through.
Okay, so selective attention is powerful, efficient, but it has downsides. Costs, as the book calls them.
Big time. And these are maybe the most surprising things for people to learn. The most famous example is inattention blindness.
Ah, the gorilla.
It's a gorilla in the basketball game. Participants are laser-focused on counting passes, and a significant number completely fail to notice a person in a full gorilla suit walk right through the middle of the scene, thump their chest, and walk off.
It seems impossible, but it happens. Makes you wonder how much we miss every single day, doesn't it?
It really does. And related to that is change blindness. This is the failure to notice even large-scale changes in a visual scene.
Like that experiment at Cornell, the door study.
Yeah, that one's amazing. An experimenter stops someone on campus to ask for directions. While they're talking, two other people carry a big door between them, briefly blocking the view.
Okay.
During that brief interruption, the original experimenter is swapped out for a completely different person.
No way.
Yes, and a shocking number of the pedestrians, the participants, didn't even notice they were now talking to someone else entirely. Different height, different clothes, different voice.
That's unsettling. Our attention is really quite limited.
It is. But that ability to selectively attend, even when, say, two different images are simultaneously projected onto the same part of your retina, has a fascinating medical application now.
Oh, what's that?
These new multifocal cataract lenses. Usually artificial lenses are rigid. They only focus clearly at one distance.
Right, like for distance vision or reading, but not both.
Exactly. But these new lenses have these concentric rings built in that actually focus light from both near and far objects onto the retina at the same time.
So you've got a sharp image and a blurry image overlaid. How does that work?
That's where attention comes in. The patient's brain learns to selectively attend to whichever image is relevant, the near one for reading, the far one for driving, and essentially ignores the other, non-attended blurry image.
So the brain does the focusing, not just the lens.
Exactly. It allows a single, rigid lens to provide clear vision at multiple distances, all thanks to the power of selective attention. It's the brain doing the heavy lifting.
That's incredible. So attention isn't just about filtering, it's about selecting reality. Okay, so once we've used attention to select what we're focusing on, the next big job is figuring out where everything is, localization. Where does that process even begin?
Well, the very first step in localization is basically separation of objects.
Right.
You have to distinguish one object from another, and crucially, distinguish objects from the background.
Figure and ground.
Exactly. That's a core concept from Gestalt psychology, that early 20th century approach. They really emphasize perceiving whole objects, not just collections of sensations. And figure and ground is the most elementary principle.
Like that classic ambiguous image. The vase, or the two faces.
Perfect example, figure 5.3 in the book. You can see the white vase as a figure against a black ground. Or you can see the two black faces as figures against a white ground. But crucially, you can't see both simultaneously. Your perception flips between them.
And the smaller area tends to be the figure.
Generally, yes. Smaller, enclosed areas are more likely to pop out as the figure. And this isn't just vision, right? Think about hearing a bird song that's the figure against the general background hum of outdoor noises that's the ground.
Okay, so we separate figure from ground, but then we have multiple figures, multiple objects. How do we group them together meaningfully?
More Gestalt principles. They identify several powerful factors that make us group things. Proximity is a big one. Things that are close together tend to be perceived as a group.
Makes sense, like dots close together forming a line or shape.
Right. Then there's similarity. We group elements that resemble each other, whether it's by color, shape, or orientation. All the red dots seem to belong together, separate from the blue dots.
Okay. Proximity, similarity. What else?
Good continuation. Our brain prefers to see smooth, continuous patterns rather than abrupt changes. If lines cross, we tend to follow the smoothest path. Think of two intersecting wavy lines. You see two continuous waves, not four separate segments meeting at the intersection.
Right, we follow the flow.
Enclosure. Our minds tend to fill in gaps to perceive complete objects. If you arrange dots in the shape of a diamond but leave gaps, you'll still perceive the whole diamond.
So the brain kind of finishes the picture.
Exactly. And these grouping principles are really powerful. They create stable, consistent forms out of potentially ambiguous input. Studies even show that it's harder to find a target object if it's grouped strongly with other distracting elements based on these principles.
And this applies to sound, too,
Right.
like music.
Definitely. In music, notes that are close together in time, rhythm, or pitch, melody, are automatically grouped together by our auditory system. It's how we follow melodies and perceive musical structure, even in complex pieces, with multiple instruments playing different lines. Proximity in time and pitch helps us organize the soundscape.
Okay, so we separate objects, we group them. Now, how do we know how far away they are? Perceiving distance or depth? That seems like a huge challenge, given our retinas are flat, 2D surfaces.
It's a remarkable achievement, absolutely. And you're right, it's a fundamentally challenging because the third dimension depth is lost when the 3D world is projected onto our 2D retinas. This is another version of that many-to-one problem we talked about earlier.
So the brain needs clues, depth cues.
Precisely. And one of the most powerful sets of cues comes simply from having two eyes. These are the binocular cues.
Because our eyes are in slightly different positions.
Exactly. They're separated horizontally by a few centimeters, so each eye gets a slightly different view of the same scene. This difference between the two retinal images is called binocular disparity.
And the brain uses that difference to calculate depth.
Yes, the amount of disparity tells the brain how far away an object is. It's most effective for objects relatively close to us within a few meters. It's crucial for things like reaching out to grab something accurately or navigating around obstacles.
And this is the principle behind 3D movies, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those old Viewmaster stereoscopes, they work by presenting slightly different images to each eye, artificially creating binocular disparity, which your brain then interprets as depth.
But what about things farther away? Binocular disparity doesn't work so well then, does it?
Not nearly as well. For more distant objects, our visual system relies heavily on monocular cues, cues that work perfectly well with just one eye open. The chapter calls it a hodgepodge of available information, which I think is a great description.
A hodgepodge, like what kind of cues?
All sorts. There's relative size. If two objects are known to be the same size, the one that casts a smaller image on your retina is perceived as farther away.
Okay, makes sense.
Interposition, or occlusion. If one object partially blocks the view of another, the blocking object is seen as closer.
Simple enough.
Relative height. Objects that are higher up in your visual field, closer to the horizon, often appear farther away. Think of a landscape painting. Perspective is a big one, the way parallel lines like roads or railway tracks appear to converge in the distance. Linear perspective. Also, texture, gradient textures look coarser up close and finer farther away.
Right, like pebbles on a beach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shading and shadows are also crucial. The way light falls on an object can give us powerful clues about its shape and its position relative to other objects in the light source.
Okay, that's quite a list. Any others?
One more important one, motion parallax.
Motion parallax.
Yeah. When you're moving, say, looking out the side window of a moving car nearby, objects seem to zip past very quickly in the opposite direction, while distant objects seem to move much more slowly or even move with you. Your brain uses this relative motion as a powerful cue to depth.
Ah, I see. Like fence posts blurring by, but distant mountains barely moving.
Precisely. It's a very effective cue, especially when you're actively moving through the environment.
That idea of motion leads us right into the next bit. Perceiving motion itself. How do we see things move? Especially considering things like movies are just still pictures shown really fast.
Right, that's stroboscopic motion. Max Wertheimer demonstrated this back in 1912. It's the illusion of movement created by presenting a series of static images in rapid succession, with each image slightly different from the last.
So every movie, every video game relies on this illusion.
Pretty much. Your retina is just getting a sequence of still frames, maybe 24 or 30 or 60 per second, but your brain interprets that rapid sequence as smooth, continuous motion. Daniel Craig leaping across rooftops in a James Bond film. Just a series of stills, perceptually stitched together.
Amazing. But what about real motion, like a car actually driving down the street? That seems like it should be simpler, but the book says it's actually incredibly complex. Why?
It's complex because our eyes are also constantly moving. Think about it. You track the moving car with your eyes, so the image of the car might stay relatively still on your retina while the background streaks across it.
Oh, right.
Or you might hold your eyes still and let the image of the car move across your retina. Your brain has to somehow combine information about your own eye movements, or lack thereof, with the changes happening on the retina to figure out what's really moving out there in the world versus what's moving simply because your eyes moved.
That sounds computationally intense.
It really is. But our visual system is incredibly sophisticated at it. Get this. Researchers have shown that people can identify human figures and even recognize friends or determine gender just by seeing 12 points of light attached to the person's major joints as they move in the dark.
Just from the pattern of moving dots?
Just from the pattern of motion. It shows how finely tuned we are to biological motion patterns.
Wow. And what about that waterfall after effect? That sounds bizarre.
It is pretty cool. If you stare intently at a waterfall for a minute or so, focusing on the downward motion,
Okay.
and then you quickly shift your gaze to the stationary cliff face right next to it.
What happens?
The stationary cliff will appear to be moving upward for a short time.
Whoa. Why?
It's thought to be due to selective adaptation. You have neurons in your visual cortex that are specifically tuned to detect motion in particular directions. When you stare at the downward motion of the waterfall, the neurons sensitive to downward motion become fatigued or adapted.
They get tired out.
Kind of, yeah. So when you look away at the stationary cliff, those fatigued downward detectors are firing less strongly than usual, while the neurons tuned to detect upward motion are still firing at their baseline rate. The imbalance creates the illusion of upward movement.
Our brain cells literally get tired of seeing something. That's wild. All right, so we've attended to something. We know where it is. Now comes the really crucial part, maybe, knowing what it is. Recognition. Is it a tent or is it a bear?
Exactly. This is where perception connects directly with our knowledge, our memory. At its heart, recognition is about assigning an object or event to a category. That's a chair. That's my friend. That sound is a fire alarm.
And as we saw with the hunters, sometimes the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. And there seems to be an evolutionary bias built in, doesn't there? Misperceiving a harmless tent as a dangerous bear is, from a survival standpoint, a safer error than misperceiving a bear as a tent. Our visual system might be slightly biased towards detecting potential threats, even if it means some false alarms.
Okay, so how does the brain actually tackle recognition? What are the key processes involved? The book mentions global to local processing. What's that about?
It's about how context influences recognition, often very early in the process. Imagine seeing an ambiguous shape, maybe a longish, curved blob.
Okay.
If you see that blob in the context of a kitchen scene, you'll likely recognize it instantly as a loaf of bread. But if you see the exact same blob in the context of a street scene, you might see it as a mailbox.
Ah, so the overall scene helps you interpret the specific object.
Precisely. The idea is that we process the global information, the gist of the scene, very quickly, perhaps even before we fully identify the individual local objects. This global context then constrains the possible interpretations of the local objects, making recognition much faster and more efficient. It prevents what's called a combinatorial explosion, having to consider every single possibility for every object from scratch.
So the big picture guides the details. That makes sense. But what about putting the details of a single object together? Like, how do we know this specific shape goes with this specific color to make this red ball? That's the binding problem, right?
That's exactly the binding problem. Our brain analyzes different features of an object, its color, shape, motion, location, and different specialized areas of the visual cortex. The question is, how does it bind all those separate pieces of information together so that we perceive a single unified object?
And sometimes it messes up, like with illusory conjunctions.
Yes, that's a fascinating phenomenon. If you flash, say, a red circle and a green square on a screen very briefly, and then ask people what they saw,
They might say they saw the shapes and the colors correctly.
but they might incorrectly combine them. They might report seeing a red square and a green circle. The features got processed, but they weren't bound correctly to the right objects.
So what does that tell us?
Well, it led psychologist Anne Treisman to propose her feature integration theory. The idea is that in an early pre-attentive stage, the basic features, like color, shape, are detected automatically and in parallel across the visual field. But binding these features together into objects requires a later attentive stage where you focus attention on specific locations.
So if you don't have time to focus attention properly.
The binding might fail, leading to these illusory conjunctions. Now, it's worth noting there are alternative theories like dynamic control theory, suggesting the system is maybe more flexible and reconfigures itself for different tasks. But the core problem of binding remains central.
Okay. Regardless of how binding works, shape seems absolutely critical for recognizing what an object is, doesn't it? I mean, we can recognize things from simple line drawings.
Absolutely critical. Line drawings mostly just preserve the shape information, stripping away color, texture, shading. Yet recognition is often surprisingly robust. This suggests our perceptual system has ways of extracting the essential shape components, things like lines, edges, angles, curves.
And matching those components to stored representations in memory.
Exactly. The idea is we build up a description of the object shape from these primitive components and then try to match that description to a template or description stored in our visual memory.
And we know there are actual cells in the brain that respond to these basic features.
Yes, absolutely. The Nobel Prize-winning work by Hubel and Wiesel in the 50s and 60s identified specific types of neurons in the visual cortex. They call them simple cells, complex cells, and hypercomplex cells that respond selectively to lines or edges of specific orientations at specific locations, or even lines of specific lengths moving in specific directions.
So these are like the fundamental building blocks for shape perception.
That's a great way to put it. They're detecting the very basic elements that make up shapes.
But just detecting the features isn't enough, right? A triangle isn't just three lines. It's three lines connected in a specific way. The relations among features must be crucial.
Absolutely crucial. A right angle and a diagonal line are just components. You need to know how they relate to each other, how they connect to form, say, the corner of a cube versus part of a triangle. This really echoes that core Gestalt idea that the whole is different from the sum of its parts. The organization, the relationship between the parts, creates the perceived whole.
So how does the brain handle this matching process, matching the perceived features and their relationships to stored memories? The book mentions network models.
Yeah, network models, particularly connectionist models, have been really influential, especially for things like letter and word recognition. Imagine a network with different layers. Maybe a layer for detecting basic features, lines, curves, a layer for detecting letters, and a layer for detecting words. Connections run between these layers.
Connections, like wires.
Sort of like neural pathways. Some connections are excitatory, meaning if a feature detector for a vertical line fires, it sends activation up to the nodes for letters that contain a vertical line, like H or T or K.
Okay, boosting those letters.
Exactly. And other connections are inhibitory, meaning activating that vertical line feature might decrease the activation of letters that don't have it, like O or C.
Pushing them down, so it's like a competition.
It's very much like a competition, yeah. The pattern of activation spreads through the network, and eventually, usually, one letter or word node becomes much more highly activated than the others, and that's what we recognize.
And these models can explain things like why it's easier to recognize a letter in a word.
Yes, that's the word superiority effect, and it's explained by top-down feedback connections.
Top-down, meaning from higher levels back to lower levels.
Exactly. In these models, once a word node, like work, starts to get activated, it sends activation back down to the letter nodes that make it up, W, O, R, K. This extra top-down boost makes it easier to recognize the letter K when it's part of the word work, compared to when you see K presented all by itself, or in a non-word string like ORWK.
So our knowledge of words actually helps us perceive the letters within them. That's fascinating.
It really is. It shows perception isn't just a bottom-up process of building from features. Our existing knowledge and expectations constantly feed back to influence what we perceive.
Okay, so that works for letters and words. What about recognizing everyday natural objects, like a cup or a dog or a tree?
Well, one influential theory, proposed by Irving Biederman, suggests that the basic features for object recognition are simple geometric shapes. He called genes, short for geometric ions.
Genes? Like what kind of shapes?
Things like cylinders, cones, wedges, blocks, basic 3D shapes. Biederman proposed a set of about 36 such genes.
Only 36.
Yep. And the idea is that these 36 genes, combined in different spatial relationships, can form virtually all recognizable objects. A cup might be a cylinder plus a curved handle gene. A telephone might be a block plus a curved receiver gene.
And the evidence for this?
One compelling piece of evidence is that object recognition tends to be much better when the object's genes are recoverable, even if parts of the object's contour are missing. If you delete segments between genes, recognition stays good. But if you delete segments at the vertices where genes connect, making it hard to identify the genes themselves, recognition plummets.
So identifying the basic building blocks and how they connect is key.
That's the core idea of the gene theory.
And all this talk about context and word knowledge really brings us back to the power of top-down processes in general, doesn't it? How our knowledge, our past experiences, our attention, our expectations fundamentally drive what we perceive.
Hugely important. Top-down processing is constantly interacting with the bottom-up flow of sensory information. Think about recognizing a friend. You expect to see your chemistry lab partner in the lab. You walk in, see them, recognize them instantly. Easy. Top-down expectation facilitates recognition.
Right.
But now imagine you're on vacation in a completely different country, walking down a busy street, and you suddenly see that same lab partner. You might stare for a second, do a classic double take.
Yeah, like, is that Chut? No, it can't be.
Exactly. Why? Because the context is wrong. Your expectation was violated. Recognition is harder. It requires more effortful, perhaps more bottom-up processing to overcome the unexpected context. Context acts as a powerful top-down guide.
So context primes us, like those semantic priming experiments.
Perfect example. Seeing the word nurse makes it measurably faster for you to subsequently recognize the related word doctor compared to an unrelated word like butter. The concept of nurse primes the related concept of doctor, facilitating its recognition. That's top-down knowledge influencing perception speed.
And it works with ambiguous figures too, right? Like the young woman drawing.
Absolutely. What you perceive can be biased by what you've seen just before. If you first see an unambiguous picture of a young woman, you're more likely to see the ambiguous figure as a young woman initially. Your recent experience creates a top-down bias.
And maybe the most striking example of top-down influence creating something entirely new is the McGurk effect.
Oh, the McGurk effect is fantastic. It's a powerful demonstration of how our brain integrates information from different senses, and how vision can sometimes override hearing.
Remind us how it works.
Okay, so you watch a video of a person's face. Their lips are clearly making the motions for ga-ga-ga.
Okay, I see gaga.
But the audio track that's playing simultaneously is actually the sound ba-ba-ba.
So my ears hear, Papa, what do I perceive?
Most people perceive a completely different sound. Ka-ta-da.
Whoa, where does da come from?
It seems to be a fusion or a compromise that your brain creates to reconcile the conflicting information from your eyes and ears. The visual information strongly influences the auditory perception, resulting in an entirely illusory percept. It shows how actively our brain constructs our reality by blending senses, sometimes overriding the raw input.
But these powerful top-down processes, these expectations and biases, they can also go wrong, can't they? Leading to tragic misperceptions.
Sadly, yes. The book mentions the Amadou Diallo case from 1999. Police officers confronted Diallo, who was unarmed, and tragically shot him multiple times, later saying they mistook the wallet he pulled out for a gun.
A horrifying example of misperception under pressure.
It is. And while the specifics of any real-world case are complex, lab studies using video game-like simulations have consistently shown how stereotypes and expectations can influence split-second decisions, like whether to shoot or not shoot a target. In these simulations, participants are often quicker to shoot an armed target if they are black compared to white, and slower to not shoot an unarmed target if they are black. This suggests that implicit biases or stereotypes can act as a top-down influence, tragically affecting perception and action in high-pressure situations.
That's deeply concerning. It shows how these perceptual mechanisms aren't isolated. They interact with our social cognition, our biases.
Absolutely. And that ties into the idea that our brains might have special processing for socially relevant stimuli, particularly faces.
Why faces?
Well, faces are incredibly important for social interaction, recognizing individuals, reading emotions, inferring intentions. Plus, all faces share the same basic configuration, eyes above nose above mouth, making distinguishing between them a challenging perceptual task. So it's argued that evolution might have led to specialized brain mechanisms just for processing faces.
And the evidence for that specialization.
Several lines of evidence. One is prosopagnosia, a specific inability to recognize familiar faces, often resulting from brain damage, even though the person can still recognize other objects perfectly well.
So face recognition can be selectively impaired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another is the inversion effect. We are really bad at recognizing faces when they're presented upside down, much worse than we are with inverted objects. This suggests upright faces are processed holistically, in a special way that gets disrupted by inversion.
Okay.
And finally, the developmental trajectory seems different. Face recognition abilities develop over a longer period in childhood compared to basic object recognition. All this points towards faces being, perceptually speaking, special.
And beyond faces, other recognition failures or agnosias can happen from brain damage, right? Like associative agnosia.
Yes, associative agnosia is where someone might be able to copy a drawing of an object, showing they can perceive its basic form, but they can't visually recognize or name what it is. Yet if they touch it, they might name it instantly. The visual recognition pathway is disrupted, but other sensory pathways are intact.
And there are even category-specific deficits.
Right. Besides prosopagnosia for faces, some patients might lose the ability to recognize, say, living things, but retain the ability to recognize man-made objects or vice versa. Or puralexia, where they can't visually recognize whole words anymore, even though they can still identify individual letters.
So the brain really does seem to carve up the world into different categories for recognition?
The evidence strongly suggests that yes, specialized modules handle different types of recognition tasks.
Okay, shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
Our brains seem incredible at, well, cutting corners for efficiency. Which brings us to the next function, abstraction. We don't always need every single detail, do we?
Not at all. In fact, retaining every detail would be incredibly inefficient. Abstraction is essentially the process of converting complex sensory information into simpler, more essential representations. We extract the critical features and discard the irrelevant details.
Why? What's the benefit?
Massive savings in storage space in our memory, for one, and it speeds up processing. Think about recognizing Cate Blanchett, a high-resolution bitmap image capturing every freckle, every strand of hair, would take enormous digital storage.
Right.
But a simple caricature, or even just a few key lines capturing her distinctive features, can still be instantly recognizable. The caricature has abstracted the essential information. The book mentions a study finding that abstracted line drawings could achieve a 97% saving in memory compared to more detailed representations, yet still be perfectly recognizable.
97%. That's huge efficiency. Our brains are doing this kind of abstraction all the time.
Constantly. Studies show this clearly. Remember those ambiguous figures we talked about? The ones that could be seen two ways.
Yeah.
If you show people one of those figures, but give them a specific verbal label, like calling it curtains in a window versus a diamond in a rectangle, later, when they're asked to redraw it from memory, their drawing is heavily biased toward the label they were given.
So they didn't remember the raw image. They remembered their interpretation, their abstraction of it.
Exactly. They abstracted the information based on the semantic category provided. A cool example is boundary extension.
Boundary extension.
Yeah, if you show people a photograph of a scene, say, a close-up of a trash can next to some steps, and later ask them to draw it, they consistently tend to draw more of the scene that was actually in the picture. They extend the boundaries outwards.
Why would they do that?
It suggests they didn't just encode the object itself, but they abstracted the broader context. They inferred what was likely just outside the frame and included it in their memory representation. They remember the gist, the abstracted scene, not just the pixels.
It's kind of like how colorimeters work, isn't it, from the previous chapter? Different physical light waves hitting the eye can result in the exact same perceived color.
That's a great connection, yes.
Yeah.
In both cases, the perceptual system is throwing away some of the raw physical information and abstracting it into a stable perceptual category, a specific color, or the gist of a scene. It simplifies the world.
And this simplification, this stability, is absolutely crucial for the next function, perceptual constancies.
Oh, constancies are truly remarkable. This is the ability of our perceptual system to keep our perception of objects stable and consistent, even when the actual sensory information hitting our eyes or ears is changing dramatically.
Like the movie theater example.
Perfect example. You're sitting way off to the side. The rectangular movie screen projects a distinct trapezoid shape onto your retina. But do you perceive a weird, warping trapezoidal movie?
No, of course not. You see a normal rectangular screen.
Exactly. Your brain automatically corrects for your viewing angle, maintaining shape constancy. It perceives the screen's actual stable shape, not the distorted retinal image.
So the whole point of constancies is to perceive what an object is actually like, its real properties, rather than just the raw, fluctuating sensory input.
Precisely. Imagine if objects changed color every time the lighting changed, or changed size every time they moved farther away. Recognition would be impossible. The world would be a chaotic, unstable mess. Constancies provide that crucial stability.
Like a black cat looking black, even in bright sunlight.
Right. That black fur in bright sun might actually reflect more total light than a white cat's fur in deep shadow. But your visual system accounts for the illumination and perceives the black cat as black and the white cat as white. That's brightness constancy.
Or an elephant far away casting a tiny image on my retina, but I still know it's huge, much bigger than a nearby gopher.
That's size constancy. We perceive the object's actual size factoring in the distance.
So let's break these down. Color and brightness constancy. How does the brain manage that?
It's complex, But a key factor seems to be that the brain doesn't just register the absolute amount of light coming from an object. It analyzes the light relative to the object's surroundings and makes assumptions about the overall illumination.
So it compares things.
Yes. A red piece of paper looks red under the yellowish light of an incandescent bulb and under the bluish light of the sun, even though the actual wavelengths reaching your eye are very different. Your brain seems to discount the illuminant, figuring out the paper's inherent reflectance property, its redness, by comparing it to other objects in the scene.
And the checkerboard illusion, that famous one where two squares look like different shades of gray but are actually identical.
That's a stunning demonstration of brightness constancy. One square appears to be in bright light, while the identical gray square appears to be in the shadow of a cylinder. Your visual system knows that surfaces in shadow reflect less light, so it automatically compensates. It corrects the perceived brightness of the square in the shadow, making it look much lighter than the identical square outside the shadow. It forces you to see them differently to maintain consistency with perceived lighting.
Even though they're physically the same. Wow. Okay, what about shape constancy? We mentioned the movie screen and the door.
Right. The swinging door is a great example. As it opens towards you, its image on your retina changes from a rectangle to a trapezoid, then an even narrower trapezoid, eventually just a vertical line when it's edge on. Yet you continuously perceive it as the same unchanging rectangular door, just viewed from different angles.
The brain just knows it's a door rotating.
Exactly. It takes the changing retinal shape and combines it with information about the object's orientation in depth to compute its constant actual shape.
And then size constancy, which you mentioned with the elephant and the gopher. The perceived size stays stable despite changes in distance and retinal image size.
This is probably the most studied constancy. A quarter held right in front of your eye casts a huge retinal image. Held at arm's length, its retinal image is much smaller.
Yeah.
Does the quarter look like it dramatically shrank?
No, it looks like the same quarter, just farther away.
Right. This is explained by the size, distance, and variance principle. Basically, your perceived size for an object depends on both its retinal image size and your perception of its distance. As an object gets farther away, its retinal image gets smaller, but your perceived distance increases. These two changes tend to cancel each other out, keeping the perceived size relatively constant. Emmert's law describes this relationship formally.
So retinal size and perceived distance are linked.
Intimately linked. Your brain uses depth cues to estimate the distance, and then scales the retinal image size accordingly to arrive at a perceived size.
But these constancies, these automatic corrections the brain makes, they can also lead to illusions, right? When the assumptions the brain makes are wrong.
Exactly. Illusions often happen when the mechanisms that normally produce constancy are tricked by the stimulus configuration. The haunted house mask illusion is a fantastic example.
The inside-out face.
Yeah. You view the concave, inside-out surface of a mask. Because we have such a strong built-in assumption that faces are convex, bulging outwards, your brain overrides the depth cues, like shading, that indicate it's concave. It forces you to perceive it as a normal convex face.
Okay. So what's the illusion part?
If the mask is slowly rotated, because your brain insists on seeing it as convex, it can't interpret the changing perspective correctly. Instead of seeing the concave mask rotate, you perceive a normal convex face eerily turning to follow you, seemingly rotating in the opposite direction to its actual physical rotation. Your brain's insistence on seeing a normal face creates a compelling motion illusion.
That's creepy. And the moon illusion. Why does the moon look so enormous on the horizon compared to when it's high overhead? Its actual size and distance don't change that much?
That's a classic and still debated illusion. The retinal image size of the moon is actually almost identical, whether it's on the horizon or at the zenith. So size constancy seems to fail here. Why?
What are the main theories?
One idea relates to our expectations about objects near the horizon versus overhead. We might perceive the sky overhead as closer than the distant horizon. Since the moon's retinal image size doesn't change, our brain, applying the size-distance principle, concludes that the horizon moon, perceived as farther away, must be physically larger than the zenith moon, perceived as closer, to produce the same size retinal image.
So it's the perceived distance that's different.
That's one major theory, the apparent distance theory. Another idea involves how we perceive the sky itself, or comparison with terrestrial objects on the horizon. Interestingly, you can reduce the illusion by viewing the horizon moon through a tube, removing the surrounding terrain cues, or even by bending over and looking at it upside down between your legs.
Chuckles. I might have to try that next full moon.
Okay, and the Ames room. That's another famous size illusion.
Oh, the Ames room is brilliant. You look through a peephole into what appears to be a normal rectangular room. But then you see two people inside, maybe children, one in each back corner, and one looks like a giant while the other looks tiny.
How does it work? The room is actually built with a distorted shape. It's trapezoidal. The floor slopes up, the ceiling slopes down, and one rear corner is actually much farther away from the peephole than the other.
But it looks rectangular.
Exactly. From the specific vantage point of the peephole, the distorted perspective lines up perfectly to create the illusion of a normal room. Because your brain assumes it is a normal rectangular room, it overrides size constancy. The person in the far corner casts a smaller retinal image, and since the room looks normal, your brain concludes they must be physically tiny. The person in the near corner casts a larger retinal image, and it's perceived as huge.
So our assumption about the room blocks the normal size constancy mechanism.
Precisely. It's a fantastic demonstration of how powerful our assumptions are in perception. And movie makers, like Peter Jackson for Lord of the Rings, use this exact principle, forced perspective, based on Ames room principles, to make hobbits look small next to Gandalf, often shooting them in the same scene without digital effects.
Clever. And these constancies, they're not just for vision, right?
Not at all. Constancy is a general principle across sensory modalities. Think about hearing a familiar tune played on a piano, and then hearing the same tune transposed up an octave or played on a trumpet. The actual frequencies hitting your ear are totally different, but you perceive the same tune. Your brain extracts the constant relational pattern of the notes. Constancy is fundamental to how we perceive a stable world through all our senses.
Okay, so this whole active, constructive process of perception, attention, localization, recognition, abstraction, constancy, it all relies heavily on our brain's incredibly sophisticated architecture. Let's talk about the brain basis for this. How is the work divided up?
Yeah, we've learned a tremendous amount about the divisions of labor in the brain when it comes to perception. Let's revisit attention for a second. Remember those three interacting systems we talked about: alertness, orienting, and executive control? Brain imaging studies, using techniques like P-scans and fMRI, have shown that these functions rely on distinct, though interconnected, neural networks. For instance, tasks requiring you to orient your attention to a specific location consistently activate areas in the parietal lobes, particularly in the right hemisphere. Maintaining alertness involves brainstem structures, and that executive control system heavily involves the frontal lobes.
So different parts handle different aspects of attention. What about the visual pathway itself? Where does the information go after it leaves the eyes?
The main pathway goes via the thalamus to the very back of the brain to the primary visual cortex, also known as V1, located in the occipital lobe. This is the first cortical station for processing visual information.
And V1 is like a map.
It is, quite literally. It contains a retinotopic map, meaning adjacent points in your visual field are represented by adjacent neurons in V1. This is dramatically illustrated by cases of localized brain injury to V1. Damage to a small part of V1 causes blind spot, or scotoma, in the corresponding part of the visual field. You literally lose vision just in that specific area, showing the precise mapping.
But V1 isn't the end of the story, right? You said it sees the trees, not the forest.
Exactly. Neurons in V1 have very small receptive fields. They analyze tiny portions of the visual image in great detail, detecting edges, orientations, etc. But to perceive whole objects, recognize faces, see color, understand motion, that information needs to be processed further.
So where does it go from V1?
It flows out from V1 to a multitude of other specialized visual areas in the cortex, sometimes called extraserifid visual cortex. There are areas primarily involved in processing color, like V4, areas specialized for motion, like MP or V5, and areas crucial for object shape and recognition. It's not just a one-way street either. There's constant communication back from these higher areas to V1 as well. It's more like a complex conversation among brain regions.
And one of the biggest discoveries is the separation between recognition and localization systems, the what and where pathways.
Yes, this is a major organizational principle of the visual cortex, often attributed to the work of Ungerleider and Mishkin. Research strongly suggests there are two main processing streams originating from V1.
Two streams.
One stream, the ventral pathway, flows downwards towards the temporal lobe and seems primarily involved in recognizing what an object is, its shape, color, identity. This is the what pathway.
Okay, down for what?
The other stream, the dorsal pathway, flows upwards towards the parietal lobe and is more involved in processing spatial information, where an object is located, its motion, and guiding actions towards it. This is the where pathway, or sometimes called the how pathway, as it guides interaction.
And we have solid evidence for this separation in humans.
Compelling evidence, yes. Brain imaging studies, like PET scans, show this dissociation clearly. Give someone a face recognition task that activates regions along that ventral what pathway? Give them a task that requires spatial judgment, like mentally rotating an object or judging line orientations that activates regions along the dorsal where pathway.
Different tasks light up different brain roads.
Exactly. It shows a clear functional and anatomical separation. So the visual cortex isn't just one big processing unit. It really consists of numerous interconnected but specialized processing modules.
Amazing complexity. Now, all this incredible perceptual machinery, how much of it are we born with and how much do we learn? This gets us into perceptual development and that classic nature versus nurture debate.
Right. And like most things in psychology now, the answer isn't really either or. Contemporary thinking emphasizes the continuous interaction between innate predispositions, nature, and environmental influences, nurture, throughout development.
So how do researchers even study what babies can perceive? They can't exactly tell us.
No. So researchers have developed clever methods to infer infants' perceptual abilities. Two main ones are preferential looking and habituation.
Preferential looking.
You present an infant with two visual stimuli side by side. If the infant consistently looks longer at one than the other, it implies they can discriminate between them and find one more interesting.
Okay. And habituation.
Habituation takes advantage of the fact that infants, like adults, get bored with repetitive stimulation. You repeatedly show an infant one stimulus until they stop looking at it, they've habituated. Then you present a new stimulus. If they suddenly start looking again, dishabituate, it means they perceive the new stimulus as different from the old one.
Clever. So what have these methods told us about instant perception? What can they do early on?
Quite a lot. We know that visual acuity, or sharpness of vision, is pretty poor at birth, maybe 2400, but it improves rapidly. By about 1 month, it's better, and it reaches near adult levels by around 1 to 2 years old. So the world starts blurry and comes into focus.
Pretty much. And infants are sensitive to shape features very early. Even 3-day-old newborns will spend more time looking at the edges and angles of a triangle than the blank center. And by about 3 months, they can typically recognize their mother's face in a photograph, showing developing recognition abilities.
What about depth perception? When does that kick in?
Signs of depth perception appear around 3 months, and it seems pretty well established by about 6 months. For instance, 4-month-olds will start reaching preferentially for the closer two objects, suggesting they're using binocular disparity cues.
And the famous visual cliff experiment. Ah yes, Gibson and Walk's classic study. They created a setup with a checkerboard pattern under glass. On one side, shallow, the pattern was right under the glass. On the other side, deep, the pattern was dropped several feet below, creating the illusion of a cliff edge.
Okay.
They placed infants who had just learned to crawl, around 6 to 7 months old, on a center board. Even with their mothers coaxing them from the deep side, the vast majority of infants refused to crawl out over the apparent cliff. They clearly perceived the depth difference and associated it with danger. This happens even if they cover one eye, suggesting monocular cues are also being used by this age.
So depth perception is pretty functional by the time they're mobile. What about constancies? Do babies see a stable world?
Evidence suggests constancies also begin developing in the first few months. Studies using habituation show that infants as young as 4 months exhibit signs of both shape and size constancy.
Like the teddy bear study.
Exactly. 4-month-olds were habituated to seeing a particular teddy bear at a certain distance. Then they were shown either the same bear at a different distance, so its retinal image size changed, or a different size bear positioned, so its retinal image size was the same as the original bear's.
And what happened?
They dishabituated, looked longer, at the physically different bear, but not at the same bear at a new distance. This suggests they perceived the bear's actual size as constant despite the change in retinal image size. So size constancy seems to be developing by 4 months.
So a lot seems to be in place quite early. But what about the role of experience, of stimulation?
Experience is absolutely critical, especially during certain critical periods. Controlled stimulation experiments, mostly with animals like kittens, have been hugely informative here.
Like rearing them in darkness.
Yes. If animals are reared in complete darkness for extended periods early in life, the neurons in their visual cortex actually atrophy and degenerate. Normal visual stimulation is necessary just to maintain the genetically programmed neural structures. Light keeps the system alive, basically.
Wow, so innate structures need input to survive.
Right. And other experiments use limited stimulation. For example, Kittens were reared in an environment where they only ever saw vertical stripes.
Only vertical.
Only vertical. Later, when tested in a normal environment, these kittens were functionally blind to horizontal stripes. They'd bump into horizontal bars they could easily see otherwise. Their visual cortex had failed to develop the neurons needed to detect horizontal orientations because they lacked the necessary early experience.
That points to a critical period, right? A window where experience is essential for normal development.
Exactly. There seems to be a window of time early in life when the visual system is particularly plastic and requires specific kinds of stimulation to develop normally. If that stimulation is absent during the critical period, the deficits can be permanent or very hard to reverse. In humans, this period is thought to extend up to maybe age 8, but the most vulnerable time is likely the first year or two of life. This has implications for treating conditions like congenital cataracts or strabismus, crossed eyes, early on.
So experience is vital for maintaining and tuning these innate capacities. Does learning also play a role in what we perceive beyond just basic features?
Oh, absolutely. While the basic mechanisms for detecting lines, depth, and constancy might be largely innate or developed very early with minimal input, recognizing specific objects clearly depends on learning and experience. You learn to distinguish a dog from an aardvark because you've encountered dogs much more often. An expert bird watcher learns to make perceptual discriminations between similar species that a novice simply can't see. Experience shapes our recognition abilities throughout life.
And what about coordinating perception with our own actions? Does just passively seeing the world teach us how to interact with it?
It seems not. Active perception, interacting with the environment through our own movements, appears crucial for developing normal perceptual motor coordination.
This is the kitten carousel experiment.
That's the classic one by Held and Hine. They had 2 kittens in the circular apparatus. One kitten could walk around actively, causing the carousel, and a gondola holding the other kitten to rotate. The other kitten was passive in the gondola. It received almost identical visual stimulation as the active kitten, seeing the same patterns go by.
Same visual input, but one was active, one passive. What was the result?
Only the active kitten, the one whose own movements produced the visual changes, developed normal visually guided behaviors like paw placement or blinking when an object approached. The passive kitten, despite seeing the same things, failed these tests. It hadn't learned the correlation between its own movements and the resulting visual feedback.
So we need to move ourselves to learn how vision relates to movement, like adapting to prism goggles.
Exactly. If you wear goggles with prisms that shift your visual world sideways, initially you'll misreach for objects. You only adapt and start reaching accurately if you actively move around and see the consequences of your actions while wearing the goggles. Passive movement doesn't lead to adaptation. Self-produced movement is key.
So wrapping up development, there's this ongoing debate, right? Spelk versus Johnson. Nature versus nurture revisited.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's summarized nicely in the Seeing Both Sides section. Elizabeth Spelk emphasizes the evidence for sophisticated, innate perceptual capacities present very early, arguing that infants are born with core knowledge structures about objects, space, and number.
So more nature-heavy.
Relatively speaking, yes. On the other side, Mark Johnson emphasizes the role of experience and brain plasticity. He argues for an activity-dependent process, suggesting that while there are innate biases, the infant's brain actively structures itself and develops its perceptual abilities through interaction with the environment. The cortex starts out less specialized, and experience shapes its final form.
So it's less about innate modules and more about the brain wiring itself through experience.
That's the gist of Johnson's view. It really blurs the lines between what's strictly innate and what's learned, suggesting development is a dynamic interplay where the infant is an active participant in constructing its own perceptual world.
A complex dance between the blueprint and the building process. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, so we've covered a huge amount of ground today. We've journeyed through this fascinating process of perception, seeing how it's not just passive perception, but an active, complex construction built by our brains. From the filtering power of attention,
To mapping the world through localization and grouping.
to identifying objects through recognition, dealing with context and binding,
Simplifying through abstraction. Maintaining stability through constancy.
and finally, understanding the underlying brain mechanisms and the intricate interplay of nature and nurture and how these abilities develop. It really drives home the point that what we see, what we perceive, is often an active inference, a best guess based on ambiguous data and prior knowledge. Absolutely. And perhaps that leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Given everything we've discussed, how our brains make assumptions, fill in gaps, use context, follow rules like Gestalt principles, and even create illusions like the Ames room or the moon illusion, all in the service of creating a stable, predictable, perceived world. How much of what you experience every single day is objectively real, hitting your senses exactly as you perceive it? And how much is perhaps a necessary, useful, yet sometimes potentially misleading construction of your own mind?